As you all probably know by now, Fred Phelps, the guy who founded the Westboro Baptist Church, the church that holds, God hates fag signs outside of like soldiers' funerals, Fred Phelps recently died. And I actually have mixed feelings about the fact that he died. And I'll tell you why they're mixed. Part of it is that I just don't feel, I feel weird about being happy about the death of someone else. I don't care who it is. But part of the reason, too, is if you look at this guy's history, he wasn't always as bad as it appeared. Early in his career, he was actually a civil rights lawyer. He spent his career defending, African Americans who had been screwed over by society. He was on the right side of justice. And at one point, he even sued President Ronald Reagan for appointing an ambassador to the Vatican because he said it was a problem with church-state separation. The case was ultimately thrown out, but that's who Fred Phelps used to be. He was a guy that I think a lot of you guys, and I know myself, would be rooting for the whole time. And then at some point, he turned away from all the civil rights stuff and just this horrible, awful, warped guy who was just focused on homosexuality and denounced it at every turn. And another reason I'm kind of torn by the fact that he's gone is because I think he actually did a lot of good in our society, not because of what he did, but indirectly because of the way we all reacted to it. I mean, if you think about this, in the last decade of his life, he had to have seen the progress of gay rights, and a lot of that happened because of the rhetoric that he used. Even Christians, even pastors who would otherwise be against gay marriage, they didn't want to be so outrageous with the things that they said in the pulpit that anyone would ever compare them to Fred Phelps. They actually toned down some of what they said. I mean, sure, you can find pastors and right-wing people saying all sorts of crazy things, but even they would denounce what Westboro Baptist Church would be doing. And even they knew, I think anyone who looked at Westboro Baptist Church would say, those people are crazy. They're just going after gay people for no reason. And the way they're doing it is so hateful. I think a lot of Christians would say, well, at least I'm not like that. But in the process, when you take away the just nasty, automatic bigotry, turns out there's really no good reason to go after gay people. Fred Phelps may have even been our greatest ally as gay rights supporters, and I say that partly because Christian pastors, Christian leaders who would otherwise feel the exact same way he did, that being gay is a sin, that you are going to hell if you're gay, they didn't want to say that stuff because they didn't want to get lumped in with Fred Phelps, or at least if they did, they totally toned down their rhetoric. Fred Phelps was such an asshole that they didn't want to be lumped into the same category, even though they felt the exact same way he did. And even though in a lot of churches in the country, you still kind of hear pastors saying, if you're gay, there's something wrong with you. If you're gay, you will be going to hell if you act on that. They feel the same way Fred Phelps did, but they knew that they couldn't be doing the stuff he did. They knew they couldn't just say that stuff and not get pushback, because Fred Phelps got pushback. He kind of united all these people who knew that what he was doing was wrong. They would stage counter-protests against him. But a lot of Christian pastors just kind of had to tone it down. And in the process of doing that, a lot of younger Christians would see Fred Phelps and say, well, I totally disagree with what that guy is doing. And so this idea that there's a biblical reason we should be opposed to homosexuality, that really doesn't make any sense. And so even when they heard, toned down rhetoric from their own pastors, they would say, well, that's not right either. I don't want to be a part of this church. I'm not saying Fred Phelps is the reason they're leaving church, but I think he played a little bit of a role in getting people to realize, oh, this whole connection between the Bible and the fact that we should be against homosexuality, that doesn't make any sense. And so they kind of started pushing away from all of that sort of rhetoric. And in the process, think about this. In the last 10 years of Fred Phelps' life, we saw like more than a dozen states legalize gay marriage, nearly 24 who are in the process of legalizing it and are going through the legal challenges right now. You realize that Fred Phelps' entire, career, at least at the second half of his life, was based on this notion that we got to stop the spread of homosexuality. And yet he was a complete failure. And you have to know that, as he's watching this happen, he's trying his damnedest to make sure everyone hears his word. And all he sees are people turning away from him. And he sees the masses, including a lot of Christians, saying, no, we're totally against you and we're supporting gay rights. It's happening. It's happening faster today than it did yesterday, you know? And I wonder what must have been the final thoughts to go through his head, because at some point this creation, this church that he founded, completely turned against him. Society turned against him. He was excommunicated from his own church. We don't necessarily know the exact reason why, but the rumor is he was kicked out of his own church because he was telling the church they should be nicer to each other and the people like within their community. And supposedly that's the reason he got kicked out. They wanted nothing to do with him. So at the end of his life, he was this guy who many of his own kids and nephews and nieces had run away from him. Many of his own church members, his community, his family in that sense, said they wanted nothing to do with him. And basically all of American society saw him as a demon. Now, maybe, publicly he was very proud of that, but I have to think that part of him was like, everything I've worked for hasn't worked out. Everything I've fought for has gone the opposite way. I'm thrilled about that because, yeah, I'm glad people fought back against him, but his entire life's work turned out to be a failure, in part because of the way he went about doing it. So I guess in a way we can kind of thank him for a lot of the progress we've made in the area of civil rights, which is ironic because that's what he started out his career doing. I guess ultimately his death ought to be a wake-up call for all of us. We can spend our entire life fighting for something worth fighting for, or we could use it to spout hate against those we disagree with. I think what Fred Phelps shows us is that if you spend your life and you dedicate it to hate, it'll hopefully backfire on you as it did for him. So why should we waste our time doing that? Let's do something positive. Let's work for more equality for more people instead of demonizing everyone who doesn't follow the line that we have in our heads. My name is Hemant Mehta, and I write at friendlyatheist.com. Please leave your comments below, and we will check them out.